Hi, I'm Dr. Chad Larson. I was just driving home from work and I was listening to the news, and the news is all about discussing the increased sort of expanse of the mandates. And I just thought I'd pull over, and I had some thoughts about some things that I just thought I'd shoot a quick video on. So sorry about the poor video quality. But so the idea is that the nature of what we're dealing with is that we have a public health crisis. And while that's probably true to some degree, what is actually a bigger deal, and the facts would actually point more toward this being a personal health issue, more so than a public health issue. Because if you look at the statistics of a kind of poor outcome of COVID, people, in other words, who have to get hospitalized, 95% have 4 underlying conditions or comorbidities. And so that's a personal health issue. But yet, none of the officials and, kind of public health experts are discussing this at all whatsoever. And that's just a really surprising lost opportunity to really explain the true underlying causes of what leads to a worsening outcome if somebody gets COVID. And so I just thought I'd just throw some of these things out there, because instead of just wishing and hoping that some public health official is going to say this, needs to talk about this, because it's just not being talked about. So there's a few things, there's a couple really basic points that I want to put out there. And let's just discuss this in the current framework. We're in a pharmaceutical-based culture. We use more pharmaceutical drugs by far than any other country, and certainly more so than we ever have in human history. And the pharmaceutical companies have a really strong hold on a lot of our institutions and systems, and they're largely dictating what kind of things are recommended and what studies should be run and so forth. And just to be clear, I prescribe medications. It's part of my practice. I prescribe pharmaceuticals. I've got lots of other tools in the tool bag that I use: diet, nutrition, lifestyle, and so many other things like that. But I just want to preface that, because there's a place for pharmaceuticals. But the idea that we're dealing with right now is that a drug is the only way to be healthy in our current culture. And based on the statistics, that's just factually incorrect. We know that these conditions that people have underlying when they get COVID, that creates a unhealthier system for their body to deal with the COVID, they oftentimes have a worse outcome. They have to be hospitalized. And so I want to talk about those things and just some really low-hanging fruit that we could all start to implement right now. And at the beginning of the pandemic, it would have been a really great time to start to discuss these things. I've been discussing these things through this channel, since pretty close to the beginning. But I think more and more people need to discuss some of these very, very basic things that there's very obvious clinical and scientific proof of. So let's go down, just have a few of these things that I wanted to sort of emphasize. Number one, and probably one of the most well understood low-hanging fruits, is vitamin D. I hope by now most people have heard about vitamin D. They're trying to increase their vitamin D, or at least they've had their vitamin D tested to see if they need to increase it. The optimal values seem to be closer to about 50 or higher on a standard blood test looking at 25-hydroxy vitamin D. So I oftentimes in my office, I use that as kind of the objective evidence to know how much I need to dose a person with. So at least I hope people are doing that, and then helping to increase their vitamin D levels either from the sun, which would be, this is what is shining in my face right now. Vitamin D you can make from the sun at different, latitudes. I think it's above the 37th parallel as we get closer into fall and winter. There's more and more atmosphere that the UV radiation has to travel in order to make vitamin D on your skin and then in the rest of your body. So people in those areas might have to lean more towards supplementation. But I've done other videos on vitamin D, and that's the point I just wanted to make now, that there's just dozens of studies, not just in general health, but specifically for this particular virus, that vitamin D is absolutely crucial. People who end up getting hospitalized, the vast majority are deficient in vitamin D. And we know it's really comprehensive and clear effects that it has on the immune system and so many other parts of our body. So vitamin D, very low-hanging fruit, very easy, free in fact to get, or if you do have to supplement, it's a very cheap nutrient, very easy to find, easy to get. Another thing that is just not being talked about, and it's the number one risk factor, and we talk about these 4 underlying conditions and comorbidities that lead oftentimes to hospitalization. It's the top one is obesity, and nobody's talking about it. And this is such a loss. I guess maybe there's some issues around, are we shaming people if we talk about obesity and so forth? It's like, we have to get past that, and we just have to discuss, this is just a real thing. Obesity is a major risk factor for a poor outcome of COVID, and it just needs to be talked about. It can be talked about in a very practical and clinical and compassionate way. And if this was done, we're going on 2 years ago now. If this was done 2 years ago, think about all the people that would have taken it seriously, because a public health official is recommending some very basic tips of what people can do to start to lose weight and decrease this major risk factor. Because many of the other of those kind of 4 comorbidities and underlying factors that are found in 95% of those who get hospitalized, there are these metabolic conditions. I've talked a lot about metabolic syndrome and other metabolic conditions, and I'll talk more about it in the future. But those are the other ones oftentimes on the list: heart disease, like high blood pressure, and diabetes, and these kind of conditions that are very treatable. And it's crickets. There's absolute silence on discussing this with the public. So again, it's not a public health issue, it's a personal health issue. These things need to be done on an individual basis, but it would certainly be helpful to get some encouragement from our public health officials to just open the discussion about this, or at least, hopefully your primary healthcare provider is discussing this with you. So, and giving you some really important actionable items so people can help to really decrease this risk factor. Another thing that there's clear studies on is spending time in nature, and whatever nature is in your area is really key, because the number 2 sort of risk factor for hospitalization with COVID is fear and anxiety disorder. And there's just a ridiculous amount of scientific literature that shows spending some time in nature, we're not talking like days and days and hours, it's minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes of just sitting in a natural setting has a dramatic effect on your whole HPA axis, your hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, your stress system. And this would be great for some of our public health officials to discuss. But again, it's one that it's the number 2 risk factor behind obesity, and it's not being talked about. And there's some very simple, very free things that you can do. And hey, go walking in nature, and that's like bonus points. You go walking, get some exercise, getting the heart rate up, getting the respiration rate up, and doing something good for your body. And then do that also out in nature. That's kind of a double bonus. But I just wanted to give you these 3 very, very basic, totally free things that you can start to implement, but it can make a major influence on your overall health and well-being, and support your immune system in such a way that it helps to decrease risk factors. Because taking a drug is not health. It never has been, it never will be. That's not what health. You're healthier when you take this drug. That's not really an accurate way to discuss what pharmaceuticals are supposed to do. But there are some tried and true and scientifically accurate things that we can do to help support our immune systems to decrease our risk for being hospitalized in this pandemic era. And so just to summarize these again, vitamin D, get tested first of all is what would be my suggestion. And most experts would agree that the 25 hydroxy vitamin D test would be somewhere between 50 and 100. And then so you have to take the appropriate dose or get into the sun an appropriate amount of time to make the right amount of vitamin D. Oftentimes, just as a quick side note, I also along with vitamin D, oftentimes supplement vitamin A. It's a little trickier with vitamin A, but speak to your qualified healthcare practitioner to help kind of discuss how much vitamin A might be appropriate. But these basic nutrients can be really key. Spending time in nature, since we know the number 2 risk factor is anxiety and fear disorder. We're subjected to so much sort of negative, fearful information, and it's really, really, really imperative that you have enough going on in the way of sort of stress management to help kind of keep that in check. Spending time in nature is a very, very easy, simple one that the majority of people can do. And then number 3 on the list is if you're significantly overweight or obese, get the proper help or get the proper education to help figure out what you need to do in order to lose weight. I'll have more coming about this in the future. It's such a key, very, very treatable issue. So I'll certainly provide more in the future, but there's lots of providers out there that can help in that regard. So those are the free, very basic, very easy things to do. Spend some time in nature, work on losing weight if that's appropriate for you, and get your vitamin D. These things are free. They will truly help improve your health and help support your immune system. So hopefully that's helpful. I just want to put these thoughts down. Sorry about the poor quality of the video. I will keep reading the studies and bringing you the information. Until then, keep it real.